Quilt Monkey is brought to you by Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects, and Lessien.
Hi and welcome to Quilt Monkey. In the previous two shows we've been making the blocks for the quilt that's behind me now. So we've made postage stamp blocks and the cross block. We've been using some fantastic sushi rolls from Lessien fabrics in Japan. And I've got these crazy spotty dotty fabrics from their Colour Basics range. And today we are going to construct our blocks and make the finished top. So we're going to sew the rows together and sew the quilt top, and I'm going to give you a couple of little tips along the way. But we've also got some leftover strips from our sushi rolls, and I'm going to show you how to make a great scrappy binding. So your quilt can be as scrappy and crazy and as dotty as mine is, if you wanted to. You don't have to. So let's crack on and get sewing. So I've made my 25 blocks now. I've made 13 of the plain postage stamp and 12 of the cross block that doesn't have a proper name. Well, it may have a proper name, but I don't know it. So the cross block and the postage stamp. And then you're going to sew your quilt together in rows. Now, best way here is just clear a floor, have a nice big space and just go for it with laying out your rows. We're going to lay it out so that you've got alternating blocks. So cross, postage stamp, cross, postage stamp, cross. You're going to have 5 rows of 5 blocks so that you've got this effect where the blocks are alternating all the way through. Lay your blocks out without thinking too much about it first off. So you've got all 25 flat on the floor, or if you're lucky enough on your design wall. And then from there, take a really good look, take a step back. A good idea is to take a photograph just with your phone. Take a photograph and have a look and see if you can see anything that immediately jumps out. If you do, just move your block around, try twisting it, because all of the blocks are, the same. You can have them any which way, it doesn't matter. So try doing it that way first, and then if it still really bugs you, then try swapping it out and moving it with a different block. You just want to get a general flow through without having too many of the same fabrics together, or without having one block that's obviously out of place. But the beauty of using sushi rolls or pre-cuts in general is that you've got this whole range of fabrics. So with this one, with my riot of dots, I always wanted to make a dotty quilt. And when I first started quilting, I can remember seeing this really beautiful star quilt, and it was a free pattern. I downloaded the pattern, I printed it off, but it used, I think, around 50 different dots. And I kept thinking, I'll make that one day, I'll make that one day, I'll make that one day. And I never got round to it because I never got round to collecting that many dots. I'd buy some dots and then I'd use them for binding, or I'd buy some dots and I'd use them for something else. So with this, when I saw the Colour Basics sushi rolls, I thought, yes, I can make my dotty quilt. Finally, I can make this crazy dotty quilt with so many different dots, I can't even count them. And that's the beauty of something like this, of something like the sushi roll or the origami squares. You've got this great variety. So I'm going to just lay out my final row and then take it to the sewing machine and sew it together and just attach it to the bottom of my quilt. So I've already laid mine out and I've got it how I want it. And then it's just a case of stacking each row. If you're not going to sew them together all at the same time, then just stick a pin through or clip them with a bulldog clip or a wonder clip or something, and just on a little piece of paper mark what row number it is. So this is row number 5. I don't need to mark it because I'm going to go and sew it right now. And then I'll be back with my finished pressed top. So I've finished sewing all of my blocks together and I've given my quilt top a really good press all over. And another thing that I've done, which whether you're sending your quilt out to be quilted on a long arm or whether you're doing it at home on your domestic machine, there's a lot of seams around the edge of this quilt. And seams unravel, as we all know. So just do a little stay stitch all the way round. You can lengthen your stitch a little bit and that will keep every one of those seams nice and secure so that when you're basting and you're quilting and you're moving everything around and the pressure that you put on those seams, it doesn't matter. They're nice and secure. That's a little tip for you. I do that with practically all of my quilts, whether they're going to the long armers. I mean, most of them do get long armed, but whether they're going to the long armers or I do them myself, unless there's a wide border, then I like to make sure that everything's secure because I can be clumsy. So I'm going to fold that up, pop that away, get it ready for quilting. And I want to make a scrappy binding to match. And I've got plenty of leftover strips. And I thought it'd be really nice to have a crazy riot of extra dots and have the binding exactly the same. So we're going to do a scrappy binding today. You take your strips, take your scraps, and obviously this works whether you're using a sushi roll or just your scrap box. Cut 2.5 inch widths if you're using scraps. And for your length, I wouldn't do anything much shorter than around 15 inches probably. The more scraps that you use, the more seams that you're going to get, and the more seams that you're going to get, the lumpier your binding is going to be. Particularly, you run in that risk of getting a lump on the corner, and there's nothing worse than a lumpy, bumpy binding. So kind of 15 inches and longer for your length. That way you're going to be a lot safer with your lumps and your bumps, because we've all got lumps and bumps, let's face it. First things first, trim off your selvage, because we don't want those. So snip those away and then place your strips right sides together. And normally what I do when I'm making binding is I sew edge to edge, because I'm using straight cuts and I'm sewing around a straight quilt, and usually I'm using the same fabric, so I don't need to spend the extra time on mitering a seam. But for this, because we're going to do a nice scrappy binding, we're going to miter our seams. So instead of right sides together on top of each other, we're going to place them at right angles, right sides together. You're going to want to pop a little pin in and also mark a line. If you're confident enough to sew a straight line corner to corner, then don't worry about marking it. But just to be on the safe side, if you haven't done it before, just mark. I'm using a regular ink pen because it shows up on camera. Usually just use a water soluble or regular soluble marker pen. Don't use ink, just in case when you wash it, it comes out and runs and disasters happen. So pop a pin in there and then sew on your marked line. Here's one I've prepared earlier, because I'm so very organised today. And as you can see, when you've sewn on the line, you've got this nice seam and this flappy bit. So we don't need that. You're just going to trim that away. Make sure that you do it on this side, not on that side, because you don't want to cut your binding in half. So 1/4 inch, just trim that away, and then press your seam flat, fold it in half along the full length, wrong sides together, and press again. And then you end up with this really nice scrappy effect with little diagonal dashes all the way through. And then sew it on just like your normal regular binding. So that's that part done. I've still got some leftover bits from making my blocks and also some more leftover strips from my sushi roll. So on the next show, I'm going to show you how to use those to make yourself a lovely coordinating pillow to go with your quilt. So until then, I'll see you next time on Quilt Monkey.